So let's talk about setting up reverbs for a vocal, right? So I've got this mixed vocal from the last YouTube video I did and some TikTok videos. And I'd like to use it to sort of go over how you can set yourself up to have success with reverb in a song. So I used capital chambers on this song, which is not a very good reverb to sort of explain how reverbs work. I'm going to use the Lexicon 480 for this tutorial because there's a lot more settings on it. It's a lot more detail. It's not just dialing in a vibe or recording a room. So it lets me speak a lot more about what some of the more critical parameters of a reverb are and how you can tune them to how you want them to sound. I'm just going to go off of the stock profile here that pops up with this 480L, but I would say when you're trying to find reverb for a sound, try a couple different profiles and find something that out the box already kind of gives you a vibe and then just sort of fine tune it from there. I think it's just a lot better way to work where you're not just sort of diving into all these settings and tweaking all these different things. Like the closer to a great end result you can start at, the less chance you have to mix your way out of a great situation. But I'm going to start with this anyway and break all my rules because we're just showing you what fucking reverbs do. We're not going crazy here. So the most misunderstood thing about reverbs and everyone who's challenged by them is the relationship between pre-delay and reverb time. As pre-delay increases, you may find that reverb time needs to decrease, and as pre-delay decreases, you'll find reverb time maybe needs to increase. For voice, I'm very partial to pre-delay times that are 50 milliseconds or longer, and the reason is because I want some separation between the clarity of the vocal and the experience of the reverb. The temptation with reverb is to just have this amazing, all right, solo the vocal, solo the reverb, find the most amazing washy setting that just blows me away, and then ask myself why it makes my whole mix sound muddy, why I can't get it to fit in there. The reason is because reverbs are like a lot of other things with dynamics, right? The impact of the reverb is only as powerful, generally speaking, as the difference between its quietest and its loudest point. So if the reverb isn't getting the opportunity to decay in between the sort of inflections and expressions of the different vocal lines, everything's just going to start sounding like a washy mess. A lot of what makes reverb sound large has to do more with the pre-delay than it has the reverb time. So think of pre-delay more as the size and the depth of the room, and the reverb time more as like the wash and the sort of haze that exists in there. You may have a sound where you want a really big reverb and you'll have a 200 millisecond pre-delay and your reverb time only be like 0.8 seconds. And it may sound weird in solo when you're just listening to them alone, but then when you drop it into the mix, you feel the size and that space with that pre-delay, but it's not taking up all the sonic real estate with this 5-second reverb tail that's not even decaying at all before you start feeding it again. It's almost like a positive feedback loop. I'm going to bring this reverb time down to 1 second because I think it's helpful for this demo. And we're just going to dial in a pre-delay that lends itself to the source material of what she's singing. And this is something that I 100% believe should be done based on feel. You want to feel where that pocket is, similar to how you would do like the slapback delay in my last video, to where it's like, where do you feel things start to vibe from that pre-delay? A couple principles about pre-delay and a couple breakpoints. So 54 milliseconds, 80 to 82 milliseconds, 120 milliseconds, and 150 milliseconds are kind of like breakpoints to me when the reverb, to where you really feel like a degree of separation from the voice in increasing numbers. They're not exact sciences. I wouldn't recommend sticking to them, but if you're somebody who's still trying to get a feel for how the sort of idiosyncrasies of pre-delay, try those couple different breakpoints. And I'd say that pre-delays longer than 120 to 150 milliseconds start to become, in most cases, a little bit more like design and a little bit less like space. Like if you want there's a song I had where it had a voice that, is kind of like ethereal, kind of creepy, not in a scary way, but just in kind of like a otherworldly kind of sense. And that song, I had like a fucking 220 millisecond pre-delay on there, and it just made everything sound so eerie. And that was kind of like more design based than it was execution based or space based. even though it was the primary space. So it's like there's an intentional sort of like pushing of the limit. And then there's another one I mixed where there was like a ooh, and you wanted this just open up when that happened. And that had a really long pre-delay as well. I think it was like 180, 190, because when that happened, you just felt the space just open up behind her, and it just had this like larger than life size with it. And pre-delay has a tendency to trick your brain into feeling like the space is really large. So this defaults to 24 or 28 milliseconds or whatever. I will very rarely use a pre-delay that's that short on a vocal. I just never like the way that it sounds. Maybe it sounds better to you. I always say, trust your instincts, trust your gut. If you like it, it's good. So let's go to these individual breakpoints first, and you can just see kind of how it plays with things, right? So let's go, come on, 54.
Ain't been breathing for many years now.
And the important thing to feel out here is the relationship between that decay out and how it affects the subsequent lines that she's singing. So the pre-delay is all about having that reverb kind of like slap in the dead zone in her voice between lines, I would say is a good way to think about it. So that's 54. Let's hear 81, 82.
Ain't been breathing for many years now.
So you can kind of hear the reverbs almost like receding in space. Like she's becoming more up front and the reverb's becoming more behind. And this is a great way to be aggressive with reverb in a very dense mix. It's a very long pre-delay and a shorter reverb time, or a reverb time tailored to the sort of tempo of the song. A lot of people say, oh, you should time your reverb to, it should be a quarter note or whatever. And that's bad practice because reverb times don't translate exactly like that. So philosophically, you're trying to tailor the reverb to the tempo and the pace of the song. Relying on the math of the BPM is a fallacy in doing that because the reverb time algorithm isn't necessarily that mathematically rigid. So you're relying on that to be accurate when it almost never is. Never assume any setting on any audio processor is anything more than a fucking ballpark, because it is.
Ain't been breathing for many years now. And the dirt and lies.
So now that we've gotten to that 120 range, you're hearing a very definite separation between her voice and the background. I kind of liked how 54 sounded. I really liked the 80 zone on her voice for this performance. I'm starting to not really like this pre-delay because I feel like the response of that reverb is clashing with what she's singing right now. They're not working well together. They're stepping on each other. Let's push it a little further just so you can hear how these increasings in pre-delay sound.
Ain't been breathing for many years now. And the dirt and lies.
So now we're getting that ethereal zone where things are like larger than life. It's almost like unnatural, but I like this better than the last one. So now let's really push the pre-delay. Let's go to like 250 and then we'll start talking about other parameters.
Ain't been breathing for many years now. And the dirt and lies we lie now.
In the right situation, that effect can be fucking awesome. It's not the song for it, but never rule it out. I'm going to do my process on here now where I'm going to go down to 24, let's say, it's where it's stock loaded up. And I'm just going to slowly open that up while she's singing until I hear the vibe just go right to where the reverb response and her voice aren't clashing. They're working together to make a really nice space.
Ain't been breathing for many years now. And the dirt and lies we lie now. Unpleasant surprises, it hides a host of them. is not freedom. This is us hiding from them. Leave it alone, and it will be clear. With our heads underwater, we feel the chilly fear. Unpleasant surprises, we hide a host of them. Weightlessness alive.
So I'm liking 58 here, and I'll tell you why. When she's singing more staccato, it's kind of like elongating her notes. It's not clashing or getting in the way. It's just, it feels like one linear experience. And then when she's singing more legato, it's also not stepping on anything. Like it's favoring both folk singing styles in one way or the other. So I like that. Second step we're going to do here is we're going to start tailoring this reverb time to where we get the most volume, not loudness volume, but the most impact, the most fatness, the most wealth out of the reverb, but it doesn't keep building up so much that everything just washes together. So I'm going to dial this back to like 0.5 and then open it up.
Ain't been breathing for many years now. Under dirt and lies, we lie now. Unpleasant surprises, it hides a host of them. This is not freedom. This is us hiding from them.
So I don't know about you, this sounds like the sweet spot for me. When she's singing out and things get to sort of decay out, it's got a very nice natural sound to it. But when she's singing faster and there's more stuff going on, it's not stepping on anything and building things up. Never underestimate the brain's ability to fill in the gaps either. And that's why it's so important to focus on the sound of things and not the settings and the visuals. So these other settings here, let's go over what some of these are doing, right? So this is shape. This is just changing the sort of like EQ profile of it, I would say. I generally don't mess with this too much because it changes from algorithm to algorithm. And if I've chosen an algorithm that I already like, chances are I'm not going to need to adjust the shape very much, but I'll do some movement in that so you can hear it.
Ain't been breathing for many years now. Under dirt and lies, we lie now.
So you can see it changes, kind of like the tone knob on the captator or something like that. It changes the sonic qualities. It changes the frequency response of the reverb. This is spread. So this is the width of the reverb, how narrow it is.
Ain't been breathing for many years now. Ain't been breathing for many years now. Under dirt and lies.
I've noticed sometimes when you go beyond 180 with spread, 180 degrees, things can get phasey sometimes. Sometimes it sounds great. Sometimes it just sounds weird, and having it be a little bit narrower or 180 degrees works the best. Size obviously is sort of like the sort of response profile, and you can see how spread and reverb time adjust when I move that. They're all related, right? So to get my nice reverb time back, I have to go back to 37. Size is an interesting thing. It's a very inconsistent setting from reverb to reverb. Again, it's something I find that I don't adjust too much because I'm already, like I said, I'm already finding the reverb profile that works best for me already. And honestly, this reverb profile is not really working for me super well on this voice. It's okay, but I feel like there's some more shine we could get, but that's beside the point. High frequency cutoff is just a low pass filter, essentially.
Ain't been breathing from...
And you see high frequency cutoff at 120 is almost taking the whole reverb away because 120 hertz is like bass, right?
Ain't been breathing for many years now. Under dirt and lies, we lie.
I've opened that up a little bit more and you're hearing more of that space, more of the walls, I would say, of the reverb in there. I like this better, so I'm going to leave this there for now. These are the most critical settings to a reverb, but if you page, you get even more. And these, I think, are where stuff really starts to get interesting and shit people really are going to want to know here. This bass setting here, this is the secret weapon of the reverb, right? In a lot of cases. What this means is like how much the bass is being accentuated or dampened. It's similar to the high frequency cutoff, but it's multiplicative, right? So you saw that this started at 1.2x. That means those bass frequencies are being multiplied 1.5 times. So what this is multiplying is the reverb time, right? So it's 1.2 times longer than the reverb time you have set. So if your reverb is too bassy, too much low end, too much of that stuff, you can bring that down and it sort of like dampens the bass. Starting to rain.
Ain't been breathing for many years.
Hear how much brighter
now.
You hear how much brighter it got?
And the dirt and lies, we lie now. Unpleasant surprises, it hides a host of them. This is not freedom, this is us hiding from them.
So you can hear when that turns up, a lot more of that low mid, a lot more of that mud comes out and shows itself. And this crossover here, this is where the point at which that bass multiplication engages, right? On the frequencies that are below this crossover frequency. I find that I don't mess with that too much unless I'm really just trying to use that as sort of like a filter off. But again, it's sort of like tied to the reverb profile. So if you're choosing a reverb profile you already like, then a lot of this is kind of done for you already. But you can fine tune things if you want. If it's a little too muddy, you can bring that crossover closer to, like rather than 750, maybe turn it down to 500 and get a little bit less of that multiplication going on. And then this is a similar sort of thing. This is the reverb time high frequency cutoff. So rather than a filter happening like it was before, this is like cutting off the reverb time of those frequencies instead. So it's like more decay based and less EQ based.
Ain't been breathing for many years now. And the dirt and lies, we lie now. Unpleasant surprises, it hides a host of them.
So a good way to think about these frequencies is that the reverb time is true for everything that is above the bass crossover and below the reverb time cutoff of those frequencies, right? So that's where the meat and potatoes is happening. I generally like to EQ my reverbs more than I like to fuck with these settings because, again, I trust the profile and then just like to use the EQ to just sort of tame things. But it's good to know because sometimes you are just like, you know what, I just need to bring that reverb time cutoff a little bit more. Ooh, I just need to like move that crossover down just a bit and it'll be perfect. So those settings I think are less important to sort of be sitting there and tweaking. They're good to know because sometimes just nudging one of those one way or the other is like the difference between it's almost there and ooh, that's perfect. But I don't think it's something you really want to sit here and fucking tweak the whole time. This next setting, diffusion, is super, super fucking important to know. And the best way to think about diffusion is when it's 0, you're in a room with walls that slap. Like if it's set to 0, you have hard surfaces in the room. Things are going to slap against each other. You're going to hear those reflections with great definition. And as you turn the diffusion up, it's like the frequencies are becoming more scattered in the room and are less slappy and less defined, right? So you can hear that difference. And this is like when you want to hear more of the walls come out in the reverb, diffusion is the setting. And when you want things to sound less slappy and more washy and sort of like mesh together, greater diffusion.
Ain't been breathing for many years now.
So you can hear those slaps almost, right?
In the dirt and lies, we lie now. On pleasant surprises, it hides a host of them.
So you can hear like things are becoming more washed out. They're becoming less sort of like defined, right? And that's what diffusion does. So diffusion is a nice setting to just soften everything if it's too sort of hard and slappy, or make things more defined if you want to hear more of the definition of those reverbs. And this can have a tremendous effect in the way that your pre-delay sounds. There's 2 more pages in this reverb with just like pre-echo levels and all that kind of stuff. I don't recommend ever touching these. This is like more, again, in the program than anything. And I like to just leave these alone, but they're just like, some reverbs have echoes mixed into them, and these are just settings that control those echoes. There aren't any in this profile, so everything's just set to 0. But when you're really dealing with sort of dialing in a reverb, the things I think that matter the most are the reverb time, the pre-delay, the size not so much because it's kind of an algorithm based on those kinds of things. The spread, sometimes, if you're like, oh, it's too narrow, it's too wide, you may want to touch those. But most of the time when I'm calibrating a reverb, pre-delay, reverb time, where does that work? And then if there's any small detail problems in there, I may address them using these kinds of parameters. Like, oh, well, it's a little too bright. Let me bring the high frequency cut off a little bit, or dampen the high frequencies on the reverb time high frequency cut here. So on this page, diffusion is the big one. Diffusion has such a huge influence on the way that the reverb sounds that I think, pre-delay, reverb time, and diffusion are the 3 sort of pillars of making a great, like, dialing in your reverb to sound like how it's supposed to sound. I didn't do this one. This is decay optimization. Again, this is just kind of like, you can change it and hear what it sounds like, but it's part of that reverb profile preset algorithm thing. So generally you'll see me leave it alone. And then the bass multiplier is just something you kind of want to know, but for the most part, those are the settings you really want to care about with your reverb. And then I'll always have the wet solo on, because almost always using a reverb as an auxiliary send. I only want reverb coming out. I'll adjust that wet dry using the fader of that actual reverb track that you see like right here. Here's the bonus round. A lot of times I don't like to do these adjustments on here, and you will find the more you work with reverb that having an EQ afterwards can be a massive difference. Everything affects everything else, right? So if I feel like a lot of times if I adjust the sort of bass level using the crossover and the multiplier and all that, even frequency information that isn't in that realm tends to pay the price or be influenced. So I'm really only trying to fuck with the diffusion, the reverb time, and the reverb tail, because most of the time if I have to do anything more than that, it just means that I need to use a different reverb profile. That's not 100% true, but it's 95% true. What I do like to do is roll off some of that bottom end on there to just get rid of just too much low end buildup, too much mud. Normally I'll have this more like 350, sometimes even 450, but this song has a lot of space available to it. And when it transitions into the chorus, which is a lot more densely populated with sounds, I use more delays to make spatial effects than reverbs when things get busy, because in my world you can get a lot more bang for your buck out of it because there's not so much sonic real estate happening. But then when you go into that verse that has so much more space available, like you're hearing here, I don't really want to get rid of a lot of that low end. I just want to make it not overwhelming. And sometimes you'll see me put like a top end filter on there if the reverbs are getting too bright. It depends on how calibratable the reverbs are, but most of the ones that I use, this is kind of like already sort of cooked in like you saw with this one, and I'll adjust it there if I need to. I didn't actually use this reverb for this song. I used Capital Chambers, which is just kind of like a reverb based on a profile of an actual room with speakers and mics and shit in it. And messing with this one is sort of very similar, where you have like the decay of the room and you can dampen it down. You have the pre-delay, which you can do, which is just literally like a delay in there. You have your filter already built in and you can sort of adjust some of the frequency things, but you can see this is a much simpler reverb. This is more about just the sound of it than anything else. And this is how that ended up sounding.
Ain't been breathing for many years now.
Wrong setting.
And the dirty life we lie now. Unpleasant surprises, it hides a host of them.
I'm a huge fan of Capital Chambers because it's just a room, and you've heard it on so many records that it has like almost a familiarity sound to it at this point. And I like things with less settings. Like, again, like you see all these settings on the lexicon, but I really try to focus on like 3 of them, because if everything else is fucked, you really just need a different profile. If I don't like the way that reverb sounds, I'd rather change the room, the mics, the speaker placement, and the Capital Chambers than try to EQ and carve and do all this other bullshit to try to make it work when really you probably just need a better source. So I'm a fan of things with less settings. I will show you one more reverb that I think is a very, very good one that I use a lot, more in rock genres and stuff sometimes, but this EMT 140, this is an extremely popular plate reverb over the course of history. And there is a setting on here that I want to touch on because it wasn't in the lexicon, but it is on a lot of different things. So I like C and A. These are different plates. So they're different sounds on here. And then this is like an input filter. So like you can do on the front end here rather than the EQ like I did before. I'll generally just do like 180 on here just to tame it a little bit. And then I follow the same process with this. I'll set this time to about 1 second and then dial in that pre-delay.
Ain't been breathing for many years now. And the dirty lies we lie now.
Listening to this, I kind of regret not using this reverb instead of Capital Chambers. Plates just have this sort of like otherworldly sound to them that's like very ethereal and very sort of like they're nowhere. Whereas like Capital Chambers is a fucking room, and it's a room that sounds good, but it is a room. Whereas like a plate, it's literally a plate of metal with sound reverberating through it. So it doesn't really have much of a space profile, which can make things sound super interesting, especially with good pre-delays.
Ain't been breathing for many years now. And the dirty lies we lie now. Unpleasant surprises, it hides a host of them. This is not freedom, this is us hiding from them.
Love the way that sounds. Huge, huge, huge fan of this reverb used in this way. I find that it loves good pre-delays. It loves a good gap between the sound and the result. But the setting I want to touch on here that wasn't on the lexicon is this mod right here. And what this is, this depth is in cents. So let's turn this all the way up to like 10 and then put the rate at something really sort of audible. Hopefully you can hear this.
Ain't been breathing for many years now. And the dirty lies we lie now. Unpleasant surprises, it hides a host of them.
It's very, very subtle. I can hear it, but most people probably won't. And I mean, when I say I can hear it, I can hear the difference, but I can't be like, oh, that's like if you said, what's the settings? I wouldn't be able to reverse engineer tell you, but I can hear the effect it's having. And what this mod is doing is this cent value is 0 to 10 cents. So basically 1/10 of a semitone. And the mod rate is just the frequency in hertz that this mod is happening, right? So what this is doing is, let's say you have like 5 cents as your depth and 1 hertz is your mod. So let's just set it to that, right? 1 hertz and 5. So every second, one side is being pitched up 5 cents and one side is being pitched down 5 cents. And then every subsequent second is just 2, 3, 4, 5. So what it's doing is it's just creating this sort of like swimming effect on either side that can make the reverb sound sometimes less defined, but a little bit more spread. And I find less is more with stuff like this. Like, especially with rates, like the slower rates, it's like you get that separation you want, but it's not so obvious. It's subtle, but you just feel it, you know?
Ain't been breathing for many years now.
So this is with it at 0 cents so that you know nothing's happening, because it could mod all at once, but if it's modding 0, it's not modding anything. And I'm going to turn this up as this playing. Hopefully you can hear the difference.
Ain't been breathing for many years now. And the dirt and lies we lie now. Unpleasant surprises, it hides a host of them. This is not freedom, this is us hiding from them.
It's just a different take on width that can sort of add a little bit of interest. I would say it's kind of like a flanging effect on the delay or on the reverb. And I just wanted to touch on that because that exists on a lot of plates and it can really take everything to the next level when used gently and judiciously. The best tip I have for the reverb is I don't recommend calibrating your reverbs in solo. The more context of the song that you have when you're making these decisions, you might feel like it's more difficult at first, but the results will work a lot better when you make decisions in context. And if you have that temptation to solo the reverb and the vocal together, do this instead. Turn the reverb up until it's too loud, and the vocal if you want to as well, but I think really just the reverb. And even more so, when you're tempted to turn your speakers louder because you want to hear things better, turn them down instead. This is going to throw you right the fuck off to start with. But if you actually want to hear better detail, listening quieter has tremendously greater value than listening louder. And if you can't discern a difference listening quieter, then whatever you're adjusting doesn't fucking matter and you just need to move on. Most cases. To review, the procedure that I like to go through with this is I'll load up that reverb, turn that reverb time to like 1 second, give the reverb more juice if you need to, and then find where that sweet spot in the pre-delay is with all the content playing. Set that up, and then open or close down that reverb time to really precisely dial in how that reverb ebbs and flows with the rest of the song. Those are the two most defining characteristics. If it's too washy, you can bring the diffusion down, and if it's too slappy, you can bring the diffusion up. And then anything else you're tempted to change, just try a different profile. More so to the point though, when you're setting the level of that send, bring that all the way down to 0. Especially if you just had it turned up, bring it down to 0. Just listen to the track for a little bit and forget about it, and then set the level from 0 up. Reverbs are almost always better felt and not heard, because if you really need to hear it, it's usually only for certain lines, and you just want to fade it up for those lines. If you have a big towering elongated phrase, just fade that reverb up during the phrase and then bring it back to where it can be sustained.
This is not freedom, this is us hiding from them. Leave it alone and it will be clear. With our heads underwater we feel the chilly fear. Unpleasant surprises we hide a host of them.
And that's how you calibrate a reverb. Like everything, it's just practice, but it's really not that complicated. The best thing you can do for yourself is to start at a point where you're already almost there. And if you're not there, try a different algorithm, try a different reverb. Get as close to a great result as you can before you even touch a setting. And then you really just fine-tuning 1 or 2 little timing things to make it really sing.